A room without books is like a body without a soul.
Hello and welcome to Sundoku, the podcast for anyone who feels undressed without a book somewhere about their person. I'm Cath Keneally.
And I'm Annie Hastwell.
Well, Annie, book prize season is open, if indeed it ever shuts down. The Miles Franklins come round again, and the winner is Xiang Lu for his Ghost Cities that they describe as part farce and part haunting retelling of the Australian diaspora, I guess the Chinese Australian diaspora. I haven't seen it yet, have you?
I have seen it. It's right up front in the bookshops, and I must admit it looks fascinating. It looks pretty wild and out there in some of the themes it covers. So yes, I can't wait to get my hands on that.
A bold choice.
Indeed. So Cath, what are you reading at the moment?
Well, I've had a weekend away with a book group and revisited some light things, although as a matter of fact I haven't read this one, but I did pick up the Adrian Mole series way back at the beginning with The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole, aged 13 3/4 by Sue Townsend, and The Prostrate Years fell into my hands. And I read that. By this stage he's 39 3/4. And she is so very, very clever. It's a fairly damning indictment of Britain around about the year, I think we're up to about 2010 with this one, and in the form of a diary, as he always does, and his family is still falling apart but still holding together. He's still in love with Pandora, who by now is a Labor MP in the Blair government, and I am a bit in awe of how clever she is and how everyone says they're terribly, terribly funny, but in fact they're rather wince-making in that you think, oh.
I want to read these, and our random reader today reminded me about Adrian Mole. I missed that period altogether, but it sounds
I don't know how you could have.
It happens.
Apparently, the Adrian Mole books are still among the books that people nominate as their that British readers nominate as their favourite books. That often comes right up at the top.
Fantastic. Social comment and humour at the same time. Irresistible. I am doing a classic Sundoku thing, reading about 5 books at once with a large pile next to my bed and a crossword. So choosing what to do in that brief time I get to read. But I'm kind of fascinated by a book that you passed on to me called Woo Woo by Ella Baxter. Wonderful, crazy book about a conceptual artist, which manages to totally lampoon the modern conceptual art scene, but at the same time makes you understand it better, and also works as a love story. And she's completely nuts, but it's such a good read, and reminds me of other books by women. Like, it was almost like I can see a genre happening here of women going crazy, and I'm thinking of On All Fours by Miranda July. Got a lot of attention last year. Night Bitch. Yeah, women just losing the plot completely and really putting it out there. And I've also will be talking to a new author called Miriam Webster, and her work is a little bit the same. It ventures into some really interesting, strange territory, sometimes half poetry, half prose. This is a genre to keep an eye on. Young women writing with no holds barred.
So back to what we're talking about today. Annie, you have been talking to one of those leapt to fame with a huge hit first book types, Graeme Simsion, who we all know now as the author of The Rosie Project. And what has he been up to?
Well, The Rosie Project, immensely funny book that everybody was reading a few years ago. He's now collaborating with his partner Anne Buist, who's a psychiatrist, on a series about mental health. And it's an interesting case of a writing partnership, which you'll hear in the interview in a few minutes' time.
If you get to the end of the book and you've been misled, blame Anne. If you get to the end of the book and you haven't been entertained, then blame me.
And later in the program, I'll be introducing you to Australian author Zane Lovitt, whose first novel was called The Midnight Promise. It won the Ned Kelly Best First Fiction Award. But I met him with Black Teeth in 2016. A very gritty urban tale of blood, sweat and murder, which I loved. In fact, I reread it and remembered correctly how good it is. He's waited 10 years for this next one, The Body Next Door. It's more of a suburban spiel, partly told by the diary of Claire, who gets killed early in the proceedings. Her diary takes us back 13 years and we trot along what's been happening in this one suburban street. It's very engaging, very likeable.
And now to The Oasis, a book set in a fictitious mental health outpatients clinic where the patients have a range of mental health issues, but the staff have their own traumas and conflicts, and the system has its problems too. And the book also manages to be engaging and funny, written through the eyes of a young psychiatrist in training. Novelist Graeme Simsion and his partner psychiatrist Buist co-wrote The Oasis, the second book in the Menzies mental health series. The first one, The Glass House, came out last year. I caught up with Graeme and Anne at Adelaide Writers' Week.
Last year we went around Australia visiting 400 bookshops and we refined our pitch for what The Glass House was about. So, Anne?
It's your favourite medical drama set in an acute psych ward in a novel.
And The Oasis is season 2, this time set in an outpatient clinic.
Season 1 was Dr. Hannah Wright, which, Anne, I'm kind of assuming is you at a younger age, am I right?
Well, when I wrote the first draft, it was totally me. I was on fire, reliving my training experience. But of course, I trained quite a while ago. But the positive was that I supervise current registrars, and I'm very much involved in the current programs. So even the first draft, in my head, she was the millennial program, and we have a daughter in the right age group. So as we did more edits, she became more millennial. And Hannah is definitely not me anymore. She's much more bolshy than I was. Back then, you asked to do something, you just did it, whereas this generation don't put up with that, and probably a good thing too.
The Oasis is the second in a series called the Menzies Mental Health Series. What's the idea behind that? That's a fairly unusual idea behind a novel.
Well, look, series are not uncommon in novels, and this one follows Hannah Wright as she's training in psychiatry. And to train in psychiatry, you generally do 6-month rotations, which gives us lots of opportunities to explore different areas of psychiatry while we're looking at what's happening in Hannah and her friends' backgrounds. So there's that arc going on throughout. But she starts off in the acute psych ward, but that's in the Glass House, and then in the Oasis, she's in the outpatient clinic. In the third one, which we're currently writing, she's back in the general hospital doing consultation liaison psychiatry. The other options are child and adolescent, forensic, private, psychogeriatrics. We've got a long lot of options.
It's always a rich source of stories and ideas. And this particular one starts with an actual sort of almost like a jailbreak, which is pretty exciting, with someone trying to get one of the inpatients out. Now, does that actually happen to you?
We've certainly had people up on the roof and kind of generally they've had to, from the secure extended wards, which are much, much smaller than they used to be. You've got to be very careful about the wall and particularly if people on day leave have accessed drugs and they're much more energised and perhaps risk-taking in a way that is dangerous. But it's fairly infrequent. But this book needs to have the lightness as well as some of the kind of the moments of or the the emotional moments, and we thought starting it in a light way, which was Graeme's baby starting it.
Yeah, look, I mean, we have different responsibilities in writing these books. I mean, we both do everything, but at the end of the day, Anne's responsibility is authenticity. We want people to be smarter when they've read these books, and we want it to be an authentic representation of what happens or could happen in a mental health setting. So authenticity is Anne, and if you get to the end of the book and you've been misled, blame Anne. If you get to the end of the book and you haven't been entertained, then blame me. So at the end of the day, my job is to make these stories as dramatic and interesting as possible without violating the authenticity, and also to make them accessible to readers. For those of you listening at home, you'll find Anne uses the word registrar from time to time, and I found about 30% of the population knows that means junior doctor, but it's just one of those words that gets kicked around all the time, and I'm constantly saying, change that to trainee psychiatrist. So we have those sorts of discussions. Look, the other thing was about the book being a little unusual as a series. It's not unusual insofar as there are multiple books there, but series in the sense of a television series, it's the season that's a little unusual in that it's structured episodically with a patient of the week or a patient of the chapter, as it turns out in the book, which is not the standard sort of novel structure. And that was really a response to a challenge for us, that we wanted to follow the medical staff, but we also wanted to take some really deep dives into particular mental health conditions. And it would have just meant so many characters going through the book, with patients and their families. We realised the way to do it was that readers would understand in a TV series idea that people come in for that week or that chapter, we meet their family, we meet the people, and at the end of the chapter we can forget them. We've had our emotional hit or whatever, move on and have another chapter. So that's a little unusual in the novel.
But you two have been approached, or more than approached. You're tied up with TV series and films, I gather. You've been signing contracts. It's another world that you're stepping into. And given what you just said, Graeme, about the way, that lovely idea of different stories but a solid thread, which is Hannah and the drop-in centre, or the not drop-in centre, the outpatient centre. Do you kind of write with an eye to TV or film now?
We write deliberately to a TV structure modified to suit a novel, because that's the structure we've settled on. But we're not saying this will be good for TV. We're already in that place already. In the same way that we don't write for a particular reader. You get yourself oriented when you start writing, and then you're sort of writing for yourselves according to the rules that you've laid down. So we're not constantly thinking this will make good TV.
It's not all patients of the week. We do follow 3 patients through each of the novels, and we've managed in the Oasis to kind of pick up from where we left off in the Glass House and pick up people that were in the first novel but weren't explored in great depth, and we now follow them in the Oasis to get more depth and richness.
Hannah's backstory is very much part of this too. As a dramatic device, that's really important. How much did that relate to the real world, like this idea that her own trauma informs the way she's dealing with patients?
Well, we decided, like in about draft 2 or 3, that she was a bit boring, because my background is really boring. Really lovely parents, lovely family, squeaky clean, but boring. So we were tossing around for how to make it more interesting, and because I do a lot of work in perinatal psychiatry and with protective services, I know a bit about the foster care system, so it kind of seemed an obvious place. And then Graeme, when he was growing up, knew someone who basically was this family, or at least had that property, and he described it to me and I could visualise it. And then on the book tour for the Glass House, the guy that was Graeme's age, growing up in that family and has continued to have that sort of place, he turned up. And we used some of his stories in book 3 that we're writing. Well, not just inspired some of the things that continue on, because in book 3, her back life becomes even bigger. Though the Oasis picks it up as well. It really is an important part of who she is, how she reacts to things, and gives a bit of colour to that family life.
One of the big topics these days in literature is whose story is it anyway, and this authenticity, and you're dealing with a lot of people's lives and in very delicate parts of their lives, and obviously you change names and everything, but how much was that an issue in choosing who to talk about and which cases to talk about?
It was a really big issue that occupied us for quite a long time, because we started off and saying, okay, the way to tell a story is like in a TV series. In a TV series, you do typically have a key protagonist, but you shift your point of view. The camera can show you a scene where that protagonist is not present. And we originally started off with that shifting point of view, and decided it was just too complicated for the reader to follow, hard for them to invest in. We said, so who gets to tell the story? And one view would have been to get a nurse. Nurses are the sort of bread and butter, the substance of the mental health system. But nurses tend, as Anne says, to be anchored in one place. likewise, the managers and the most senior people have their jobs, whereas the trainees move around. And we felt that rather than having someone like Gregory House who knows everything, we'd start with someone who knew nothing, and the reader could then take that journey with them. Because if you're watching a traditional medical program, everybody knows quite a lot about basic medicine, so it's fun to go with someone who's an expert in a particular field. But psychiatry is notoriously, people are notoriously unfamiliar with it. So let's start with someone who's learning, and we'll learn with her.
Another fascinating thing about this is the fact that Hannah has got the wide open eyes of a trainee or of someone new to the system, and of course the first thing you notice is how flawed the system is and how many dinosaurs are operating within the system and things like that. And what that does, I guess, is it's pretty critical of the system, and as a reader that's great it's just what we suspected, that it doesn't actually always work for everybody, and we're not hearing the point of view of the patients as much, which we are in your book. It's the kind of book that would make the system sit up and look at itself and may even have the idea of changing policy within it.
Oh, it would be great if we could, and particularly we've just come from New South Wales, that's in dire straits in New South Wales with psychiatrists in public resigning. Look, there's a lot of problems with the system, and there's a lot of need for change, and if this helps, that would be fantastic. But the beauty of Hannah being a millennial is they, also get bolshy about it, and this isn't good enough. And we wanted to show both sides. And there's been a Royal Commission in Victoria which really was highlighting the patient's perspective. And I can't write from that perspective per se, but we wanted that on the page too. So there are a lot of fabulous memoirs from lived experience mental health point of view. But they tend to have the mental health worker as the evil other, or just the other, and you don't really see much of their side. So this is told from a mental health point of view, mental health worker's point of view, but we try really hard to be sympathetic, empathetic, accurate as can be of the patients, and we put it past lived experience people to get their feedback as well. So we hope we've managed to do that so that there is that balance.
And we've been pretty brutal, as you comment, in our depiction of the system and of the humanity of the mental health workers and administrators, that they have their own problems, they're not perfect. And there's a line towards the end of The Glass House, where following a pretty serious tragedy, where they're all reflecting on it. And I think Hannah says, look, we are ourselves, our resources are so limited, our techniques so limited, ourselves so human, the challenge is so great. We did an event in Mildura, and a whole bunch of mental health workers turned up with that on their T-shirts. They had T-shirts made with that statement about it, and so they relate to the fact that they're imperfect. And we were interviewed at one stage by an interviewer who said, "This Hannah, I can't believe her. She's troubled in her own life. She's her relationship's breaking up. She's not sure who she's just broken up in a relationship. She's not sure where she's going now. How can she be a psychiatrist? I think she's 27 years old. This is normal for a 27-year-old, and get used to the idea that you junior doctors with significant responsibilities are 27-year-old human beings."
Who Googled to get the answers. I mean, she's in the Oasis, she's Googling, and our daughter was horrified, but her 4 years of studying medicine and the intern year really haven't prepared her for this. She's still learning, and she gets supervision. Yes, she's going along to lectures, but that doesn't prepare her for Taylor, who has borderline personality disorder, and the book says, or Google says, DBT, dialectical behavioural therapy, is the best therapy. But Taylor can't access it because she can't afford it, and even if she could, they'd drop her because she wouldn't turn up for the appointments. And Hannah's reading up to see, can I do this? So this is the reality.
I have to ask you too, do you have patients who Google? It must be a problem right through the medical world these days. And there is a moment early in the book when a patient does try to tell her what the problem is. And she says, Dr. Google versus a psychiatry degree.
Yeah, and it gets a bit confronting because Google doesn't put it in perspective. But I think for trainees, it's really confronting because when they don't know, whereas I'm prepared to tackle Dr. Google with a patient, but I've got 40 years of experience. For someone like Hannah, I think it's a lot more confronting. But Google doesn't put things in perspective, and the difference in many ways between psychology and psychiatry is we have the medical background, and I've tried to show that in both books. There's been a physical illness that's caused psychiatric symptoms that is meant to be where we shine and pick that up. We don't always, obviously, but we do have the background to try and do that. And there's, in both books, some serious medical kind of conditions. And, of course, in the third book, she's in the general hospital treating people who are dying from cancer and have illnesses that have psychiatric symptoms or consequences.
Did you intend to do a series?
It was always in my head.
Yeah, I think for the first time that's true. With the Rosie Project, I had no intention of doing a series. With the Two Steps Forward, no intention of doing a series. But once they were done, we saw the potential.
I'd just like to ask you finally about how you work together. How does the writing process work between the two of you?
Look, it's evolved and it depends on the book. But the first thing I would say, and I've written about writing. I've got a book out called The Novel Project, which is about the process of writing. And with that sort of mindset, I would say you have to have a process agreed between the two of you. And it might, it could be different processes for different books or for different people, but you've got to know what you're doing, the two of you, so that neither of you goes down a rabbit hole and the other person isn't happy with what they've done or whatever. And our process for this series, for the Glass House and the Oasis and whatever, the Menzies Mental Health series, is that we plan meticulously together, and then Anne writes the first draft, because although that's changing a little now, but Anne has tended to write the first draft because she understands what goes on, how things are done. Is that fair? We might have a card, a scene that says Sian is admitted to the acute psych unit. That's all. That's what I know. That's what Anne knows. But when Anne then picks it up, and I don't know whether it's going to be the police who bring her there, whether it's a cat team, whether it's her family, whether she walks in herself, whether she goes by the emergency department, whether she's met by a doctor or a nurse or an administrator and fills in forms. How does is she locked up? How is all this done? And this is second nature to Anne. So Anne just writes all that stuff and gets it down, and then we go through back and forth refinement.
And we both want the same outcome, so and I think we bring different strengths to it too. Obviously the knowledge, but there's things like Graeme wouldn't ever describe clothes or the environment, so I add that in. So there's sort of different strengths, and he's a much neater writer than me, and he does the character Carey, much better than I could. So we definitely bring different strengths to the book.
This week is definitely not the week you'll be doing a lot of writing because you're cruising the country promoting this particular book, but what will happen after this week?
Well, in fact, we're doing quite a bit of writing this week because we're editing. So we have a first draft of the next book in the series, which we have a contract for and so on. And once you've got the first draft, you can edit anywhere. So you can just open and say, there's a really bad paragraph, let's have a go at making that better. And it might be sitting in the airport, waiting for you to come and interview us, whatever it might be. So we get quite a bit done, and we have to while we're on the road as well. It's just that first draft, we really like to lock ourselves down and do that.
You've obviously had great reaction to your first book, and you can expect the same for this one, but what personally do you hope people get from it?
Graeme says, hopefully makes everyone smarter, but I think for mental health workers, sort of a feeling of a more authentic book where they're not Nurse Ratched. And a couple of my colleagues have said, oh God, it gave me PTSD back to my training. Sort of some of the not so good moments. But I think from the general public and for people with lived experience or on particular lived experience in the family, help them as part of a healing journey and making sense. We've had that feedback from several families that, hey, it's made me understand, make sense of what was going on behind the scenes when my son was diagnosed with schizophrenia or had a suicide attempt. Or we've had people say it was part of my healing journey reading. So if it can be that, or it can sort of inform them in some way, that would be wonderful from my perspective.
Yeah, I think the biggest kick I get out of writing, and I think Anne feels much the same way, is when something that you've written lands with someone at the right time and place to make a difference in their lives. And it might be a huge difference, like realising they're autistic and becoming an autistic activist, or quitting their job and walking the Camino and moving to another country, or in these cases just understanding a little bit better about what's gone on in a mental health setting, perhaps in their family or colleagues or whatever. So It's the individuals who come to us or don't come to us, but who've been impacted by the book. That's what it's about for us.
Graeme Simsion and Buist talking about their latest book, The Oasis.
Now time for you to meet Zane Lovitt with his new novel, The Body Next Door, which comes 10 years after his last novel, Black Teeth, quite a dark urban tale. Very clever, but it was tense. And I asked Zane first why he's come back with something in such a different mode.
I found myself reluctant to keep on writing the grittier, darker stuff just because of just the state of the world at the moment. You know, what I see on the TV news and what I suppose we're all dealing with as adults, I suppose, in light of COVID and everything post-COVID, I really found myself desperate to write my own escapism. And that meant much more likable characters and a story that included a whole lot more humour. When it comes to what I'm reading at the moment, I don't find myself really wanting to put a lot of work in. You know, if a book is going to take 10 chapters before I finally realize why the main character hates his mother, in the past I always would have done it very willingly, and now I think my willingness to put up with the darker side of human nature is a little bit diminished, and so that's kind of being reflected in what I'm producing at the moment.
Absolutely, I am totally on board with you there. Those are the books I pick up now. I don't necessarily want cozy, but I want something that reaffirms my faith in human nature. This one does. It's gorgeous. The Body Next Door, a suburban story, which, you know, the suburbs probably your happy hunting ground, and a narrow focus, one street in St. Albans called Carnation Way. So tell us how your hero Jamie finds himself back there.
Well, Jamie grew up there, and he finds himself. He moved. He went to law school. He moved out. He became a reasonably successful young lawyer. Got married, and then found that his marriage sort of went down the toilet. And in light of that, and the fact that his father's starting to have something of a cognitive decline, he's found himself moving back. He's moved back to Carnation Way, which is a sort of little suburb in Melbourne's western suburbs, and he's sort of trying to put the pieces of his life back together now that he's sort of brokenhearted. In fact, he's sort of lost his belief in the very concept of romantic love. Looking after his dad and working at a community legal centre. That's how he finds himself back there. He's got a lot of history in the place, and that history sort of bears out as his story is told. He had a friendly relationship with Claire, who's the other narrator of the book, and she, at the start of the novel, she's suddenly vanished.
That's right. We meet her after we meet Jamie. In the way the narrative unfolds, she's gone missing in the present day, but we meet her via her 13-year-old diary. What do you want us to know about Claire as we meet her in the beginning of the book?
But I realised about halfway through the book that I was really trying to produce the most likeable person I could possibly conceive of. This was someone who, more than anybody, I would like to just hang out with. She's funny, she's warm, she's non-judgmental. She's got a lot of life experience, but some of those negative experiences haven't really damaged her or damaged her outlook on life. She is divorced. She's a UK expat who's been living in Australia for 30-odd years now. She married an Australian, and that marriage went down the toilet as well. And she's living on her own now. In fact, has been for a while. In the point where we pick up her diary, she's living on her own in Carnation Way. I'm not sure if I would have purposely set out to write someone who, was sort of my ideal likable person. But that's what I ended up doing. And in fact, the Claire chapters of the book really came very, very easily, largely because I just liked her so much and I understood her humour so easily. Jamie's very much sort of putting a story together. He's solving a mystery. In fact, Claire is solving a mystery too, but Jamie's sort of having to sort of solve both, if you like. He's shouldering both to try to get to really to the bottom of what's happened on this street. A young man was found under a house. His body was found under a house at the time of Claire's diary, and he's trying to get to the bottom of that, as is Claire. But also Claire has disappeared in Jamie's timeline. So he's trying to deal with all that. And I found that with Claire's chapters, she sort of really rolled off the page a lot more straightforwardly. As I say, with Jamie, I had to sort of, there was a lot of sort of pipe fitting. But with Claire, she's just sort of rolled off the page because she was just so much fun to hang out with.
And so is Jamie, though, Zane. I mean, what is not to love about this young man who's very self-aware in a wry kind of a way? He's willing to shoulder some of the blame for the marriage breakup, although his ex is obviously the ex from hell. and he's looking after his dad, who is also an important character in the book, Bruce. And dementia is something that you're dealing with very sensitively too. But so we feel as though this is great. It's cozy. There are some dark undercurrents. And we get a bit laid back because the 2 points of view coming one after the other give us a kind of a wandering philosophical, metaphysical exposition. But we do need our wits about us because both of them are picking up clues at different times in the street's history, and we need to gather them as well. So what are some of the things that are coming to the attention of both Claire and Jamie that might mean something?
It's this group of 7 houses that exist down here at the end of Carnation Way. Carnation Way is a cul-de-sac, and these 7 houses are occupied by different people over time, but some of them are occupied by just the one family. For example, Jamie's family have lived there throughout the entire period since before Claire's diary right up until present day. So it's really just about how these people react. They are very friendly, but there is a little bit of menace mixed in there with certain characters who maybe we don't know them very well. In Claire's story, she's meeting a man on a dating app. Well, she's met him on a dating app and she's starting to date him. They're both in their mid-50s. And we know through Jamie's point of view that the two of them have moved in together and been together for quite some time. But here's Claire now. She's suddenly vanished. No one knows what's happened. The police are taking an interest. And it seems entirely possible that this gentleman who in Claire's diary she's meeting for the first time has in fact 13 years later had a hand in her disappearance. So it's really just about how these various characters interact and how Jamie sort of starts to wonder and in fact starts to snoop into what goes on behind closed doors.
And the other element that as readers we're looking for raises its head in the form of a blossoming romance. Can you,
Jamie and Tess is a young woman who moves into Carnation Way right around the time that Claire disappears. She has an interesting history that comes out, but it's possible that her personal history is more mysterious than she's willing to reveal to anybody. It is a blossoming romance for Jamie in a way, but what he's really dealing with is the fact that his cynicism, really. I mean, he's given up on the very idea of romance, of love. He feels like it's a big trick that's been played on him, the way it's been played on everybody, and that it's essentially a hoax. Yeah. And he's trying to find a way forward in a world where these sorts of human connections are actually bunk. And there needs to be, another reason to get out of bed in the morning, certainly another reason to develop these sorts of relationships. That's really what he's trying to take on. Mm. The fact that there's a woman there who he would, as a single man without this sort of baggage, that he would be, to have an interest in and might ask her out or something like that. But that's really kind of secondary to the fact that he has to sort of get his outlook straight. Because he doesn't know really if he holds to the very concept of two people being in love in the way that, all the songs and all the TV commercials and all the movies seem to suggest that we should all be trying and trying to do, and we should all be able to do.
Yeah, and I guess the exemplars of that kind of romantic love, or at least lasting love, in the book that Jamie isn't cynical about, are his own parents.
That's exactly right. And of course, that's been thrown into disarray now. Jamie's mother passed away in the intervening years between Claire's diary and the present day when Jamie's narrating his story. His mother has passed away. He always considered his mother and his father to have had to be an exemplary example of a really healthy modern relationship. But now he's wondering what his father's role might be in the disappearance of Claire. He's also wondering if his father had a role in the strange case of the dead body that was found under the house next door. It was an empty house at the time. And he started to question all these things that he always sort of took for granted about his father, and therefore about his parents' relationship. So even when he's sort of in crisis about his attitude to love and to marriage and to romance, he's starting to question, and starting to be given very good reason to question it in the best examples of love and marriage and romance that he's had.
I loved the fact that it was a character-driven story, and that was where the real interest was. I mean, obviously the solution of the crime was fun too and interesting. But the more I read, the more I thought, wow, this is a sort of elegy for the suburbs, which used to be where we learned how to live in community. You grew up in one place, maybe, if you're lucky, with steady neighbours. And that's a disappearing phenomenon, isn't it? Was that part of what
Absolutely.
You were thinking?
Not so much an elegy for it. Certainly, I've always been attracted to the idea of sort of trying to pull back the curtain on suburban living. You know, it's the suburbs has been something that Australia sort of effectively exported, I think, along with beaches. You know, if I think of Neighbours and Home and Away, we've successfully exported these two locations of the suburbs and the coast. And I like the idea of sort of digging into, by way of a murder mystery, to dig in what's actually going on in these neighbourhoods, in the suburbs, and to pull back the curtain a little bit and to suggest there's something more going on underneath. Certainly, I think you're right that there is an ideal, and I think quite a worthwhile ideal, in communities being stable and not being as, I suppose, as disposable as they often. How dire that problem has become, I'm not the person to diagnose. I honestly don't know. But ever since the Second World War, there's been a progression of communities basically becoming increasingly detached and dissociated, to the point where they're having to rely on things outside of their I suppose, a traditional support network of a neighbourhood in order to get by. I think that's definitely a phenomenon that has been going on for a long time and continues to go on now. But it's not, I mean, I like the idea of presenting that ideal that this actually still exists in somewhere like, Melbourne's western suburbs. But I was also very, very keen on sort of trying to say, well, what's actually going on here? Like, how perfect is it? If we're all playing sort of happy families on the outside, what's actually going on when the curtains are closed and the doors are shut? And those question marks, that questioning that Jamie does, especially of his neighbours, about what's actually going on here. These people present in a particular way, but there are issues, there are bodies, there are missing women. What is actually going on behind these closed doors? That's really what I was trying to sort of sink my teeth into. Yeah,
and that's what I loved about it. And do you think you're on a roll? Is there another one of this ilk in the works?
It's definitely in the works. The idea of giving you a timeline is too terrifying, and I'm always wrong. I won't do it because I always get it wrong. But it's definitely of the same ilk, as I say, moving away from the bleaker stuff just to give my soul a break.
Author Zane Lovitt talking to Cath about his new book, The Body Next Door.
You're listening to Sundoku with Annie Hastwell and Cath Keneally.
Books form part of my stress management routine, and I'm squeezing them in as a way of calming down before bed most of the time. I am reading mostly just light-hearted detective fiction, like Alexander McCall Smith and Richard Osman, and sometimes it's before bed, and sometimes it's, you know, for a flight or whenever I'm alone, which isn't very often. Actually, a lot of my daytime reading is, of quite a different type, and reading fiction is a great counter to that. It's a way to relax. The podcast Backlisted mentioned Sue Townsend a few weeks ago, and it reminded me of just what an extraordinary book it was. And for my whole life, I've remembered the funny parts about Adrian Mole, but then had forgotten just quite how gimlet-eyed Sue Townsend actually was, and what a sort of sharp observer of people, and actually how awful all of the characters really were. And it was great to pick it up and have a look at the Cappuccino years and see how she'd maintained these characters in all their terribleness and taken them forward so successfully. I'm pretty judicious with my authors, because I guess I feel like I don't have a whole lot of time to throw at experimental reading. So something like Backlisted or even Sundoku is a good way to find out what people are enjoying, people whose taste I would trust. But I like to pick up, pop sci books. So I read a book on breathing not long ago that was fascinating, and sort of took the old methods, the old yogic methods of breathing, and talked about what modern research was saying about metabolism and how it affects things like anxiety, and that was really fascinating. And it took on board some of these modern fads like the Wim Hof, the cold guy, and how that all ties in with the breathing and the metabolism. So that stuff is interesting, but I do a lot less of that now, I think, again, because I'm using reading a bit more intentionally as a way to modulate my mental energy. I am a very physical person, and I get a lot of intrinsic satisfaction from movement. And so what caused me to be such a reader perhaps was just having so many books around me when I was young, and having reading parents, and I just found it was a great way of going to another world, and perhaps just the memory of that ability to be transported stuck with me. So reading feels like a friend.
And if you have been reading something amazing and would like to tell us about it, we would love to hear from you. Send us some spoken words about your latest favourite book.
And tell your friends. It's been great to have had your company for this edition of Sundoku. I'm Cath Keneally.
And I'm Annie Hastwell. Look forward to catching up next time. This podcast is produced by 4 book addicts refusing treatment.
Cath Keneally,
Michaela Andreev, Sarah Martin,
and me, Annie Hastwell. Our thanks to composer Quincy Grant for the music. If you want to know more about the books and authors featured in this episode, check out the show notes. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at SundokuCast. That's TSUNDOKU Cast.